Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, or whatever time zone it is with you in the world. It is your Lore Saviour, and this is the third campaign diary of my home game of Chicago by Night using Vampire the Masquerade 5th Edition rules and the relating Chicago by Night book. And we've wrapped up the sacrifice, where the Lasombra were made a part of the Camarilla, but not in the way that you probably think it would be, because remember, one of the players is a Lasombra character. And yeah, there's quite a lot of spice to go around with this. But before I get properly involved with this recap session, a little disclaimer. These were two sessions that were done at the tail end of December, literally just after Christmas. We were all available and free, and we could just like get together and do it. These two sessions back to back. I'm recording this on the 19th of January 2024 in the year of our Lord Talos. And my memory is a bit patchy on this because I would have liked to have recorded this just after those games, but certain things have prohibited me from doing that, which is a pain. Fortunately, on the little Discord group that I've made for the session, I have like a recap channel of like the things that have happened previously, which is for their benefit as well as mine. So if you see me like fiddling with this arm here, it's just prodding the phone every so often just to get up the notes that I wrote, because a lot happened in both these sessions, and as I said, my memory on this is a bit patchy at best. So deal with it, I guess. Like, this isn't anything professional, like it's me just sitting in front of a webcam with OBS recording this session. So without further ado, I think we should get stuck in. Now, where we left off is that the Lasombra, that the coterie was collecting, were left in the observatory. And as I said, the observatory being, like, I can't remember the name of the observatory, but it's one that exists in Chicago. There's a secret, like, lair haven beneath said observatory that's belongs to the Malkavian player, and that's where they're being kept. I did say that I wasn't going to set the haven on fire, because I'm a polite person like that, which the players know about. They knew that that was supposed to happen now, so this isn't a spoiler thing for them now, I guess. But there was also the issue of dealing with the individual that Malkavian killed to get a little sucky from. They dealt with that, they hid in the haven, and then Malkavian used his ghouls the following night to get rid of them, so they were kind of out in the picture. You know, just adapting the plot a bit more, because none of the characters had any idea what to do with them, so I dropped them that one, I guess. And they kind of like getting Malkavian to sort it out anyway, because it was his mess. But also, as I said, the session started off with the Malkavian sire, Dana, who was been introduced now to all the players, because, as I said, they found out that they were being watched and spied upon. The Malkavian player character had a bit of a heart-to-heart, I guess, like wanting to keep hold of the trust of their sire, who they're blood-bound to, being careful around the Lasombra, yada yada yada. The Malkavian player was able to find out bits of information from the remaining vampire before they were slaughtered by the sire. How somebody has like been trying to set them up or whatever, you know, to get rid of the Lasombra, I guess. Of course, those who know who this individual is and the alias that they use, that wasn't revealed. I mean, the alias was Frank Vaughan, was revealed, but the person who is using that identity hasn't been revealed. And I'm a little surprised, actually, that the Malkavian player didn't push for that further. Like, they were able to work out that it wasn't the person who they said there was, but they didn't push more. And I'm a bit surprised by that. But it does mean that certain things are sort of being left out there in the open, and depending on what the players want to do, I may leave that or just let it carry on, like as part of the ongoing plot that I will do next. But if they're not interested in it, I'm obviously not going to be feeding them that information. It's you know, playing it by ear sort of thing. So the remainder of the session took place in the Succubus Club, which the players felt the scale, like just how fucking huge it is. Which I feel really pleased about, because I used the first Chicago volume sourcebook, which has Chicago by Night First Edition and the Succubus Club sourcebooks, and there's some maps in there that I used for myself primarily to help get the sense of the scale of the club, and I'm glad that that all came across as well. They were dealing with Baby Chorus, the Malkavian player, they informed Damien about how they were set up and how there's this Frank Vaughan that was after them, and obviously being a Brujah was quite pissed about this. He was quite pissed about a third Lasombra being brought into the mix when he was only aware of 2. He was like made to stand with the other 2 with the band that are performing. They're on their best behaviour for the most part, which I'll explain in a moment. The Lasombra player at one point was snatched away by Crook, as I said they were going to, like in a previous campaign diary thing. I don't remember which one because I recorded the first one back in November, just to give you a sense of scale. And he revealed that, let's go and talk to Nita Wainwright's Haven, and the Lasombra player agreed. Obviously a bit apprehensive about it, and I have plans of how I'm going to resolve that, which I will talk about in the end of this session, in the spoiler section, as it were. But then they were sort of like given back as Kevin Jackson came onto stage. But before I get ahead of myself, that also left the Brujah player, and I introduced them to Portia, as I said they were going to. And the Brujah player, just like very straight down the point, okay, you've summoned me over here for a reason, what is it? And as I said, they're going to go and try and find Melaine. And if you know about that character and what their involvement is in 5th edition, that might seem a little unusual to you. But I just want to see what they do with it and how they follow up on that. To see what they find. And if they don't, and if they're not really interested in it, I'll just pretend it never happened. But Portia's now in the mix now, and I've added that to our little relationship map. So that should be interesting to see what they do with that. Then Kevin arrives, and he gets on the stage, and he announces everybody. He makes the 2 come forward, bringing the Lasombra in, made them center stage, as it were. Sierra, as part of the Sacrifices Chronicle, steps onto the stage, snatches the mic away, and just says the entirety of the Lasombra are coming to the Camarilla. There's uproar and upheaval. Lasombra player, both in and out of character, was surprised by this. I think everybody was, to be honest. Although, of course, the players knew that the Lasombra were coming in, because I made it clear that's what the sacrifice is doing. But yeah, there was just the way it was done, I think, surprised everyone. This is where I would change some of the story a little bit. Because we have this third Lasombra in the mix, one of the players, and Kevin wasn't made aware of this, because originally it was only the 2, the Malkavian, the Brujah, that was doing all of this. Kevin had words with the Lasombra character, and the conversation that would happen between Sierra and Kevin happened with those 2. Why? Because I thought it would make for a very interesting reaction. And it also scared the shit out of the Lasombra player, because they've been hiding in the city for the last 2 years, which they revealed to Kevin, because Kevin made this point saying, I think I mentioned this in the last campaign diary thing, that, right, tell me the whole truth, nothing but the truth, or so help me God. If I think you're lying to me, I'll kill. Just going through all those points. And obviously, the Lasombra player was wise and listened to every single word of that, and was very truthful, who their sire was, where they're based, all that stuff. Which is also introduced some very interesting plot points, which I'll touch upon later in the spoiler section of this. But it was because of that interaction that it was then decided that, for every Lasombra that wants to join, an elder has to be sacrificed, which is a Chicago-based thing and doesn't happen everywhere else, but people seem to grasp onto that. So that conversation happened between them. Yeah, it was a very fun bit of roleplay that. I gave Kevin Jackson a southern accent just to make him stand out a bit more from everything else, which people seem to like. It's not in his description that he's southern, but I just wanted to give him kind of a different flavour. He's an important character, and he should stand out a bit more. So and people seem to like that, which made me feel really good. So once that was decided, the Lasombra player was made to go and report back to the coterie, and the Lasombra Sierra agreed straight away, and Malenkoff knew what was going to happen, so he ran for it. The players intercepted him, and then Damien put a stake in his back. So quite a lot of the sacrifice has been changed. So Malenkoff didn't escape and go on a killing spree, and it's not the players that would bring him to the sacrifice. And some purists, I guess, might be a bit annoyed about that, because remember, those two were actually made to go and wait in the labyrinth. But because of the difference in the situation, how an additional Lasombra was added into the mix, I thought that needed to be upped in the security somewhat. Like, you two stay here, like, we can't trust you, like, away. And, you know, as I said, it just makes the players feel a bit more involved with the scenario, rather than just, like, putting them through a railroad, as it were, and doing it as written. Like, it's you can do it as written, it's fine, it's a very good story as written. I just feel that if you don't explore the characters' backstories and things and integrate them into the story a bit more, then you're kind of missing the point. And that's how I interpreted the scenario anyway. So, and the players, for the main part, the most important bit, they're the ones who really enjoyed it, and that's all that matters, really. So I feel that I did a good job with that. So once all of that was done and dusted, the coterie were now taken to, like, some room, the manager's room, where Kevin had the conversation with the Lasombra player. The Malkavian and Brujah player were awarded a major boon for their work. The Brujah player would inform Damien about Manenkov's ghouls being out and about, which I thought was a very nice touch, because I actually forgot about them. Totally. So it was cool that they remembered that, and they had Damien go and deal with that, like, put him in his good book, so to speak. And that was in exchange for a minor boon, I seem to remember. Like, you know, I scratch your back, you scratch mine, so that's a pretty good thing there. I'm glad that they did that, and the ghouls are probably out of the picture now as well. But there's also a little boon from the sheriff, so that's pretty nice as well. Now, what would then happen after that is that the Malkavian and the Brujah players, they'd go their separate ways and fuck off, because the party was essentially over. The Brujah player kept the van that they were, like, moving stuff around with. They're the only one who could drive, so that's pretty neat. Then it just left the Lasombra player and Kevin with the sacrifice. And who's the first sacrifice that's going to be? Now, it's supposed to be Manenkov, but that's for the entirety of the Lasombra. We're talking about the specific Lasombra here, who's been in the city a lot more. They had to, like, see how keen they were, so they had to go and kill their sire. Now, I know the Lasombra player from their sheets and whatnot and how they've been interacting, not very combat focused. So what I then did, just to really up the urgency of all of this, is that I got the wolf pack involved. That the wolf pack were going to send them there, they're going to drive around on their fucking motorbikes, and they completely tore the club up. They were shooting people left, right and centre. A woman called Alex, who is a touchstone of the Lasombra player, got harmed, like, mortally wounded. She's now a ghoul to the Lasombra player. It was something that the character wanted, so that's now happened. Now, I should put a stain here, but because of using their Lasombra powers and whatnot and killing their sire, because the sire is dead now with aid from the wolf pack, I believe it was primarily because it was the convictions, as well as just outright killing somebody, because they're on Humanity 7. Not anymore, they're now on Humanity 6. So that's all fun and spicy. And the session ended with, you know, just sort of the aftermath of this club. In a shit heap, disintegrating sire, and the wolf pack just, like, fucking off. And that leads on to the next session and the final part of our sacrifice tale. Things pick off pretty much immediately. The Lasombra player giving ghoul and vampire 101. You know, a nice bit of role play there, which is interesting because the Lasombra character doesn't know everything about their own existence. And I introduced a bit of homebrew here from the V20 book Ghouls and Revenants, because the Lasombra player asks, is there anything that, like, happens to a ghoul with Lasombra blood in them, which is a very good question. V5 doesn't explore any of those idiosyncrasies, but Ghouls and Revenants has a weakness for every breed of ghoul, for lack of a better phrase. And the Lasombra, their shadows aren't quite in place, as it were. Like, they're not wildly out of control, but they kind of move and sway, as it were. They're not rigid as shadows are. I need to remind myself fully, because I think there's something else, like a part 2 to that as well. But that's all the Lasombra player knew, so that's absolutely fine. That hasn't properly kicked in yet, as it were, but I'm sure as time goes on, as there's more exchanging of blood, then things will take a bit more of a stronger effect. But once that had happened, the Lasombra player then decided they were going to explore the cupboard a bit more to see if their sire was hiding anything. And they found in their manager's room that there's like a fucking huge armory with like guns and whatnot, a side that they'd never seen before. They explored through like a private bedroom and quarters and things and found like a little diary and a key that just basically unravelled bits and pieces of a backstory that how the sire had been looking at the Lasombra for some time. A lover called Maximilian, which you may remember is the Ventrue who was supposed to embrace the Lasombra player. I don't think I mentioned the name, but there you go. And the Ventrue and the Lasombra sire were lovers. There's also mentioning of another Lasombra that's like gone too far, which the players had worked out who that was, or at least one of the players had worked out, and they mentioned later on just to confirm it, and I did too. This is the Lasombra that was supposed to embrace the Brujah character, but I didn't make any mentions of. I think I mentioned a name. Yes, there did. A brother called Eduardo, who, just a name that just pulled out my ass, basically. But there was also a load of cryptic things there, things that the Lasombra player couldn't quite work out, and hoped that they would meet this, like, Ventrue to try and pick up some pieces a bit more. So with that, we then moved on to the next night, which was the sacrifice proper. Where there was quite a bit of information that was being exchanged, and lots and lots of roleplay, and I absolutely loved their roleplay and the different threads and beats and all of them going off and doing different things. With the sacrifice proper, they went to their separate clans, except for the Lasombra player, who had to stand by Kevin and Damien the whole time with the other two Lasombra. The Malkavians, as dictated in Chicago by Night, were generally okay with the idea with the Lasombra joining, but at the very last minute, Sun, the Malkavian Primogen, was like, no, never, sort of thing, which caused a bit of confusion, and I'm curious to see if any of the characters follow up with that. If they don't, that's fine. If they do, that's also fine. We'll see what happens. But also part of that, as part of the Malkavians' backstory, they were approached by somebody behind them saying they're not supposed to be here, you're a demon, which sort of began to lay the threads of the Children of Salvation Golconda cult that they are in via their sire. You can read Forbidden Religions to see what I mean by that. But there was a bit of conversation afterwards, after the sacrifice was made, where the sire basically unveiled a lot of what happened, part of their embrace and whatnot, and how they're some way or another fucked, because it means if there's this conversation about things, then this hunt, as it were, is going to be starting very soon, and I have ideas of what to do with that. It just depends on whether the player will follow through with them, which is fine. If they do, they do. If they don't, they don't. It's, I can only just suggest things, and if they react things. It's basically this give and take reaction and relationship between games master and player. So there was that element of it. There was the Brujah element of things, where the Brujah were like, no, we do not want the Lasombra here. The Brujah characters saw the silhouette of their sire. Well, sorry, not their sire, the Lasombra one, and I made a point it was them because we talked about it, and they had like a very stereotypical, like, 70s sort of punk aesthetic with like 90s stuff in there as well, like lots of like gelled up pointy hair, and I made a point of mentioning that so they knew it, so the player knew it was them but not the character. So yeah, and they made a note of that. Unfortunately, they didn't get that many successes, so they couldn't make out any finer details, but once the eye contact was established, the spiky head individual had fucked off. And then there was the Lasombra player who was looking around and saw that there was a Ventrue that was constantly making eye contact with them. This was the Ventrue sire, Maximilian Dorman, and I did my best Maximilian Strauss impersonation, and that just went completely unnoticed. Like, they introduced themselves like Maximilian Dorman, and I just thought, I hope somebody would pick up on that, and they didn't. It's like, so rude. Now, an interesting thing happened here with the Lasombra player is that they confronted them with everything from the get-go, and I thought there was going to be a bit of nuance or subtlety with that, like to see if this was the same person or just sheer coincidence, but they worked out basically, and for lack of a better expression, all the character development I had hoped to be stretched across many sessions had now been stretched across one encounter. That they were part of this about, Kevin Jackson knows about this, etc. and so forth. And all those threads were unraveled in that first encounter. So presently, I am a bit stumped what to do with this character, but who knows, maybe the player will want to do something in the future, and then I can just inject things at dramatically appropriate moments. But as far as I'm concerned, that story is all wrapped up. But as I said, if they want to do more things with them, go ahead. And I'll just, comply as and when needed. And then there was the sacrifice itself, the really spicy bit for me. Because, as you know, the book, it encourages two different modes here, but I only adhered to one of them. Is that the different clans, they have this vote, and then they cast their vote. And it works in such a manner that, should they do this, it's a tie. So I then gave it to the players to decide, or rather, the Malkavian and the Brujah player. And because there was only 3 of them, they couldn't really have that much of an influence, I thought. Yeah, and so the 2 players were then brought forward to make the decision. Do the Lasombra join the Camarilla? Now, you would have thought that both the players would have said, yes, the Lasombra can join. But they didn't do that. But they also didn't say no, either. Because what they actually did is that they refused to vote. Which I found extraordinarily interesting for a couple of reasons. Now, the Malkavian player, both in and out of character, does not like being put on the spot like this. So they refused to vote for that reason, and they just clammed up and they described their emotion and whatnot, which is fine, and I think Kevin would know this, and I wasn't going to beat them too hard about it currently. But the Brujah one refused to vote. Now, after saying that they refused to vote, they then said about how the Kaitiv weren't allowed to do a vote, and they didn't think it was right, how they should have been given a voice, and they couldn't vote for based on free interactions and stuff like that. But they didn't actually say any of that during the sacrifice. They said a lot of it afterwards, out of character, but not at the sacrifice. They just refused to vote. So I was then put in a very interesting position, because as the storyteller, what do you do with that? On the one hand, it would make sense for them to say, nah, you're not welcome here, fuck off. But at the same time, it would make roleplay a bit difficult. And I've already begun to sort of establish some sort of manipulation going on, Kevin wants to make good use of the Lasombra player. And it would just make sense with that in mind. And also the fact that the Venture were keen on having the Lasombra join, with that aim at thinking as well, to bring them on board. So Kevin decided that the Lasombra could join, which is obviously provides some very interesting situations with certain Primogen members and whatnot, and how they feel about the Lasombra. But I doubt the players would want to chase up any about that. But if they do, they do. They don't, they don't, which is fine. So what happened then? Well, the conversations with the Malkavian and their sire regarding the cult happened. And the interesting thing that I did here that surprised everybody, and they worked out why I did it, was quite easy to do, because it was an inspired idea, if you know what I mean. The Lasombra player is now the Keeper of Elysium. Just so they could learn a bit more about the Camarilla and have a bit more responsibility. But obviously this is to keep a fucking leash, tight one, on this Lasombra player who's been hiding in the city for the last 2 years. Yeah, it gives them an honorific title with a very little amount of power. They were introduced to Annabelle, who in Chicago by Night is the de facto Keeper of Elysium. There's actually a couple of de facto Keeper of Elysiums, but now there is an official Keeper of Elysium, and it's the Lasombra player. So yeah, that was a fun, intense interaction. And the Lasombra player also spoke with Crook at the end, some more relationship regarding stuff. Establishing contact and whatnot. And those two are really beginning to hit it off, which I kind of like. Maybe setting up some security and whatnot for the Abyss. But once, obviously, the burning of the Haven happened. But yeah, that kind of wraps things up regarding the sacrifice. And what I've done now, there's going to be a month's worth of time skipping. I'm just going to jump forward by a month now for the next session. So we're now obviously going to be entering the spoiler section of the recap, which is like up there somewhere. So if you're one of my players, fuck off. If you're somebody watching this who wants to go into the next session totally surprised, stop watching now. Check out the various things in the description below to purchase and all the social media stuff. And with that out of the way, fuck off, and let's carry on with the rest of what we're going to do next time, because we're doing more than the sacrifice, obviously. So what plans do I have? Well, quite a lot as it happens. Now, lots of ideas, and I'm not writing any of this down because I don't like, if I commit things to paper, I'm going to try unconsciously railroad the players, and I don't want to do that. As I said, many different ideas and threads and beats and whatnot, so it might get a bit chaotic, but if I find it's a bit too much, I'll just stop. Because the important thing with this is that the moment any of us stop enjoying it, we're going to talk about it, and if it's really unsalvageable, we'll just stop. And if I'm not enjoying running it anymore, then I'm just pulling the plug. There's not going to be any conversation about that. Because we're just doing this to have fun. And we haven't actually organised a date for the next session yet. It may be next week, it might be the week afterwards, so it's why we're now getting these fortnightly, because it gives us a bit of time to organise things. But regarding the session itself, I haven't done one of these setups before, like you meet at Elysium, or the thing happens at Elysium, but we're starting the next session at Elysium. To put a twist on this, the Lasombra Players Club is now being added to the list of Elysium in the city, which gives the characters a safe place, as it were, as the other two don't really have a huge means of security within the city, and I feel that with this in place they can gravitate towards that, which also adds a lot of danger as well. Lots of opportunity for hunters and whatnot, should they do anything spicy. But yeah, they're going to start at this club at Elysium. I've given the players a task to think about what's going to happen within the next time jump. And I'm going to mention this at the beginning of the next session, maybe, perhaps, or at least cover some of the bits that they already know. But the main interaction that's happened so far is an interaction between the Lasombra and Brujah character, where there's a bit of an education of some of the politics, and how the Brujah player now owes the Lasombra player for this betrayal, as it were. You know, how a lot of what happened during the Sacrifice Chronicle wouldn't have happened without them, and they just fucking throw them under the bus, which is a really shitty thing to do. Understandable, I guess, given the perspective of the characters, but also really shitty. And I also find it really fucking baffling is that this player, as one of our, like, red veil lines thing for our game, is not to betray each other. And I don't know about you, but that's a fucking huge betrayal. Because if I was a spiteful ST, which I think I can be when it's appropriate, I could have easily have gone, the Lasombra are not part of the Camarilla anymore, fuck off. But the player knew that I wouldn't do that, and I think that's just a little shitty, personally. However, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to punish them, which I will touch upon in a moment. But one of the things that the Lasombra made the Brujah character do is that out of this session, they now know presence. I think they know awe, and it's kind of fitting with the character in a sense. But it's also kind of weird, like the Lasombra being of the shadows, doing things in secret. And now they have something that draws the spotlight to them. There's other parts to this as well, which I'm a little irked about. Because what I was expecting was like a couple of sentences between the two of them about what happened. But what actually transpired was transcribed into 20 pages, yes, 20, out of session RP, and myself and the Malkavian player were a bit annoyed by this, because there was a lot of roleplay opportunity here that just sort of happened off camera, as it were. And I just appreciate if stuff like that's going to happen, it just like really shortened down. It's part of the reason why I don't have a channel for, like, out-of-character RP stuff, because then you really start to get fucking convoluted about if, buts, and maybes, and, like, I'm not going to read all of it, and I wasn't going to read 20 pages. I just skim-read bits of it, and I read people's backstories, but I'm not prepared to read what's essentially 20 pages of fan fiction. Like that, if that makes me a bad ST, then whatever. But it's a bit annoying. So the Lasombra player knows presence now, and as I said, the Brujah player is going to get punished in some way for this. So's the Malkavian player. Why? Well, they chose not to vote. They disobeyed the prince at a huge monumental event in the Camarilla history. Now, the Brujah player said that they did of this, because the coterie weren't given a vote, like, I can't make this decision, blah, blah, blah. Well, oddly enough, the Brujah player is somewhat of a anarch sympathiser. They're also trying to get good footing in the Camarilla, and so they're trying to get the best of both worlds, and nah, that ain't happening, in the sense that I don't think Kevin Jackson will allow that very much, and I don't think the Brujah and the rest of the anarchs won't either. Because remember earlier on that I said that the Lasombra player had made a point saying that he'd been in the city for the last 2 years, and Kevin was none the wiser. So with that piece of information in mind, Kevin is like clamping down on the security to the best he can in Chicago, so things are actually going to be a lot more difficult to feed and interact, especially for those non-voting characters. To the point where, at the beginning of the next session, you're not starting with 1 hunger, you're starting with 2. Just as a little hint that they fucked up. That they should really listen to the prince. Which I don't think is too harsh, but it's enough to make them think twice, and to be a bit more careful. So what else do I have planned? We're obviously going to be touching base more on the Malkavian's cult-related stuff. Now, obviously, the Malkavian character wants out of this, and the player wants to explore this a bit more. But at the same time, with this hunt around the corner and knowing that they're going to die shortly, possibly by their own sire, it's caused a bit of unrest. So I'm now going to crank the weirdness up to 11, and they're going to wake up with a dream in true Malkavian fashion. A figure covered in blood, who is the one that's been giving them all these contracts to deal with different targets and whatnot, who I've labelled on our relationship map as Mr. X, because I didn't know what to do with them at this point, but now I do. This is going to be Nikolai, the former Tremere, Primogen, and Regent. Why Nikolai? Well, I like the character, more basically. He's not in 5th edition. It's implied that he's gone missing or he was killed. The last time he was seen is that he was fucked off to the Vienna Chantry, which, as you know, for 5th edition lore, it blew up. But it's mentioned in a map in Chicago that he was spotted last in a particular location. It's actually written down. And it also presents a couple of plot beats and thoughts about, like, well, maybe Nikolai isn't dead. Maybe he blown up this way. Maybe he was just killed by his child, the current Tremere Primogen, which I like because it keeps things open-ended for people who want to put that character in. But obviously, Nikolai being, well, he looks like a child, but he's like hundreds upon hundreds of years old and very cold and callous. It allows people to put the child figure back in, but not assume that people would be comfortable with that in. And my players are okay with that to an extent. Not to harm children. But given the age thing, it might be okay. I have to tread this one carefully, is what I'm saying. As it's a yellow veil, I believe, and Nikolai sort of bends that rule a little bit because he looks like a child, but he's hundreds of years old. But anyway, what Nikolai will have the Malkavian player do is that, yeah, I can help you with this issue that you have, but you need to do 2 things. You've got to kill your sire, which should be very interesting to see how they react to that. But you've also got to go and kill this Tremere character, the Regent and the Primogen, which I think if they put 2 and 2 together, this might be connected somehow. Like, okay, you like a sire, you're wanting to kill your sire or your child, maybe. And then the third part of this, they'll be told the location where then torpor, and then deal with that. And the reward to that is that they're an ally to the Tremere, and they have this strong boon and relationship, I guess, between them that way. But that's, of course, assuming that the Malkavian player is going to do what I asked them to do. And if they don't, that's fine. Like, I'm sure that they're not going to be as rigid with that. And given the relationship they have with their sire, I don't think it's going to be as straightforward as the Lasombra killing their sire. So we'll see how that works. With the Brujah player, as I mentioned, there's a bit of punishment involved there. Like, we're going to introduce Critias's schools there. He's going to be sent off to the University of Chicago and have like a basic Masquerade and Camarilla one-on-one to assert his loyalty. No doubt there's going to be some interactions with the Anarchs. The Anarchs are going to be a bit pissed off with him because the Brujah player would have had a chance like to make a proper stand and they didn't. They just like did nothing to try and please both parties, but they've pissed both of them off. Something I forgot to mention is that in the previous session there was a contact of theirs. They had their computer hacked with a threat of cryptocurrencies and whatnot. And they have to say choose a side. This is Weatherbottom hacking them, who's been like spying on them. So there's going to be more of that theme and motive around. But I think that as the Brujah player had like mentioned that or wasn't focusing that much on when we were talking about themes afterwards, I think that might have been a forgotten detail, like I just forgot here. But yeah, there's going to be more of those interactions, like having the Brujah character pick a side. And obviously they will need to do that because neither side's going to be very pleasant with them either way. The Brujah player, if they choose to investigate Mullane for Portia, the implication being that Mullane is dead, that was summoned away via the Beckoning, via stuff that's written in Critias's write-up. Like the blood bond between the two has snapped. Now that could be many different things, but as I mentioned, the Mullane is back in town in the previous session, with the succubus portions of this anyway. Yeah, we'll have to see what happens here, because it might scare the Brujah a little bit that they're now dealing with a lot more powerful forces. And then there's the Lasombra player, who I have quite a lot of spicy things planned. I want them to interact with Horatio Ballard because, as I suspected, the Lasombra player was throwing their money around quite a bit, and they were surprised that Kevin would let them have their sire's, resources. They now have got 5 resources in the club, they have an armory and all that stuff. No, Kevin's not going to take that away, but Horatio is, to assert his dominance over the new Lasombra, and he's going to try and use that to make himself a stepping stone to get the position of Ventru Primogen, and that's going to remove a different character whose name I've forgotten and I cannot be bothered to find them now, but it's one of the new characters that was introduced in 5th edition for the Ventru, who's also aiming to be the Primogen, who I don't think is a particularly engaging character. I mean, I get why she's there. There's a bit more of a humane aspect in that, but it doesn't do much for me. That, and I really like Horatio Ballard, who I feel is a lot more interesting and unique. So there's going to be that element of that involved. I want to introduce them to the Hecata as well, because I love Wraith, I love the Hecata and all their vibes. And I want there to be some consequences for having that innocent Joe Smith, the guy who had his head blown off in that rental car. They're going to be connected to them somehow. And I was thinking about that this morning, that there's a young Hecata who really valued the man as a teacher, like a high school sort of thing. And it's going to threaten one of the touchstones of the Lasombra player, or outright kill them. That's my intention with that one, to really put them out of their depth here. Because the Lasombra's got all this money and this resources, but in the vampire world they're fucking nothing, and I want them to they want to feel those pressures of fighting against these resistances, and I think with the Hecata there and what I intend to do there is going to be a lot of fun. There's also the stuff to do with Crook. Now, I'm not too sure how to go about role-playing this Burning of the Haven despite all this time, and what I'm actually going to do is introduce a different story beat, is that Anita is going to show up at the Abyss and is going to be like, alright, let's cut the chase here, know why we're here, because Crook was sneaking about trying to search out the place, and the Lasombra player, if they don't put too much of their brain power into, they may just dob Crook in, yeah, I know that Crook was going to do this thing, but I was wanting to stay out of it sort of thing. But no, Anita would be there. Well, it's actually Genghis. Genghis has gone missing. You're the last person to see him. Where is he? There's a little thing here. I'm going to kill Genghis off. Genghis is dead, because they had this encounter in a bit of a wooded area, if you may remember, and I was like crawling away into the darkness, who's been killed by werewolves, which is going to introduce a whole load of messy complications if you know anything about the vampire and guru relationship in Chicago. This is also going to have a time with the Sabbat, which is where the Lasombra sire of the Brujah character is going to be properly introduced. The Sabbat and some of the guru are going to try and invade Chicago again. The history is repeating itself. All the while with this cult, this Children of Salvation, begin their hunt to, reduce the numbers back down to 1 again. So it's going to get from 1 to 10 or 11, I guess, really fucking quickly. But going back to Anita and Genghis, yeah, obviously that's where the conversation is going to be if the Lasombra plays their cards right. And if they don't dob Crooking, Crook will appear in pure Nosferatu fashion. Like, you didn't dob me in, you actually just saved my life. We're going to call off this fiend and we're going to consider your boon, like, paid with. And then the rest of the conversations about the security and whatnot's going to be had. So yeah, we're going to start introducing all those different beats, or most of them, I guess, or a lot of them, during Elysium. And then the rest of it is going to, like, develop as the characters like interact with what they want to interact with or chase what they want to chase, whether it's something that's happened in the sacrifice portions or in this more, I guess, free form bit, because I'm now planning everything. I'm not having to use the book for a story structure so much. I'm just using it as like locations and character NPCs, excluding the Hecata, because the Hecata are not really mentioned in Chicago by Night. There's some Giovanni in the Chicago Chronicles, but there isn't much of a presence mentioned in Chicago by Night 5th edition, so I need to have a little reread to see of the older Chicago stuff to see what the Giovanni were doing at that point and what I can develop for this session. Well, the next session, whenever that is. But that's kind of it, really, and that brings us to the end of our 3rd campaign diary thing. And the titles of these are going to vary a little bit because it's not the sacrifice anymore, it's more these freeform stuff. And hopefully these sessions will pan out the way that everybody wants them to, and everybody have lots of fun. And if we don't, we'll just stop playing and just do something else, which is totally fine. My one fear with this, before I sign off properly, is that I hope it doesn't become a case where I'm running 3 different vampire games with people, because if I want them to start working a bit more as a coterie now. So hopefully they will start doing that, and we'll see what happens next time. So if you've enjoyed these campaign diaries I'm doing, subscribe and like and all that YouTube bollock stuff, because I know these are popular and people like them. Check out the various links in the description below, where you have a list of various source books I use for this game, as well as the vast majority of Vampire the Masquerade 5th Edition books. If you buy any of those books with the links provided, I get some of the money back, as they are affiliate links, and it's no extra cost to you. So you pay as much as you usually would do via those links, but I just get some of the money back, and I'm able to do more lore dives for you and just build up my extensively beautiful library there, and now over there. So yeah, if you like the lore dives I do, consider supporting me that way. So completely optional, but I would really appreciate it. And yeah, as I said, like, subscribe, and just let me know in the comments below what you like about them. And I don't know when the next one of these will be, so hopefully it won't be too long of a wait. But take care, everyone, and until next time.